They told you, with your personality, with your hair, with your hijab, with your skin color, with your preferences, with your gender. They told you, with their silence, with their words, with their resentment, with their absence. They told you, you don't belong. Yet, here you are.
I'm Hannah Lancer, an ENT registrar in the West Midlands, and I'm the BMA representative and the WENTS Equality and Diversity representative for the Association of Otolaryngologists in Training.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Iman Hassan and I'm a fifth year medical student from the University of Liverpool. I'm also the president of the Liverpool ENT Society.
Hi, my name's Ellie Priestman. I'm a fourth year medical student at Bristol University. I'm also the ACIT Equality and Diversity Ambassadors co-chair, as well as being the vice president at the Bristol Women in Surgery Society.
Hi, I'm Michael Okocha. I'm a general surgery registrar in the Southwest, and I'm the Association of Surgeons in Training Equality and Diversity Officer. I really hope you enjoy this episode of 50 Faces of Surgery. I hope that it leaves you feeling valued, inspired, and most importantly, welcome. Here I am.
Professor Claire Hopkins is a consultant ENT surgeon at Guy's Hospital, as well as being a professor of rhinology at King's College. Educated at Oxford University, she went on to train in otorhinolaryngology. She later secured a fellowship in rhinology. She was since made a professor of rhinology in 2016. Professor Hopkins has received much acclaim for her work. Starting early, she received the Martin Wronker Prize for Medicine and has since gone on to receive many awards for her research in rhinology. Her latest work, however, has brought her to the heart of the pandemic, as she was one of the first few people to assert that anosmia was a key symptom of COVID-19.
Brilliant. Well, lovely to meet you. My name's Iman. I'm from Liverpool ENT Society. So my question for you is, can you just take us through what your morning routine is like?
So I'm a night owl, and I'm really not a morning person. So my family are really well trained that they don't speak to me until I've had at least 2 cups of tea. So I get up, get dressed, and I'm out the door with a cup of tea in my hand really within about 5 minutes. And I use that time on the train just to sort of decompress and get myself ready for the day.
Very nice. I'm a big tea drinker myself. So can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up?
So I was born in Cardiff in Wales, and very passionately Welsh, and take every opportunity to get back to watch the rugby when I can. I grew up really always wanting to do medicine. One of my earliest memories is sitting on the shoulders of my father doing his morning ward rounds on a Saturday. He was a max-fac surgeon and was really adamant that medicine, and particularly surgery, wasn't a good career for a woman, and really tried to persuade me that I should find something else to do, particularly if I wanted to have a family. I think he was also probably one of my harshest critics, and nothing ever seemed to be quite good enough. And I think really trying to seek his praise and respect was one of the things that motivated me most, and probably drove me to do all of the things that he told me not to do.
Very good. And what was life like just growing up in general as well?
It was great. I enjoyed school. I had a good time. I was able to get to medical school and do the things that I wanted to do. So certainly there were no problems there.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Why did you apply to medicine?
I honestly never wanted to do anything else. I was one of those nerdy kids that had a hospital fuzzy felt set and a hospital Playmobil, and everything was built around that being what I wanted to do. And I hadn't really considered any alternatives if I hadn't been able to achieve that. So fortunately it worked out. I was also really artistic and briefly thought about doing an art foundation course before medicine, but really found that surgery gave me that opportunity to be creative and artistic at the same time as pursuing medicine. So it was a perfect fit.
So, what were you like at medical school?
I loved medical school. I trained in Oxford and I think I thrived in a competitive environment. And I really felt that I was surrounded by like-minded people, probably for the first time. And I think we all worked hard and played hard. So we made the most of the academic opportunities that were there, but also did lots of things from, I played rugby, I rowed, I took part in various medical school events and had a pretty good social life as well. So I think it was very much a case of burning the candle at both ends while I was there.
Do you have any memories from rugby tour?
Many, but probably nothing that I can share here.
And where did you do your training?
So after graduating, I did a house job in Bath and then did a lot of my early surgical training there. And that's where I really decided on ENT as a career. I'd always planned to do orthopedics, but did an ENT job as part of a rotation. And one of the consultants there was, really one of my first mentors and showed me what a great job it could be. And I think particularly endoscopic sinus surgery really attracted my attention. The ability to convert sort of 2D CT images into 3D anatomy was really fascinating. And then when I discovered that the endoscopes were called Hopkins rods, it seemed that destiny was calling.
I thought they were named after you.
Absolutely. I've had many good trips around the world based on that assumption.
And what was your first week as a consultant like?
I think probably slightly disappointing. You realise that you have the same frustrations, operating lists start late, turnaround of cases is too slow, the kit's never there, the clinics are overbooked, but suddenly you find yourself in a position where you're somehow supposed to be able to fix that. And we all know that that's almost impossible to do. But I think what you realise is that you're really not the finished product when you become a consultant, and it's really just the start of another very steep learning curve. And I think that's probably the way it should be, because if we are completely prepared to be a consultant on day one, there's nowhere really to go with the next 25, 30 years of our career. So I think, we have to think of training as building a foundation on which we will then face all of those future challenges. And they're very different. It's about people management. It's about, developing new services, improving outcomes, being a patient advocate. And that perhaps they're things that we don't think about as much as in training, but it's still very challenging and rewarding.
What challenges have you had to face along your journey?
I think on the surface, I've had a fairly charmed life and I've achieved most of the things that I set out to do at quite an early stage. I've always struggled to achieve a good work-life balance, and I think that's still very much a work in progress. Hopefully my family will assure you that most of the time I get the balance just about right. But I think that's something that we all find difficult, and at times I certainly let work overwhelm me. I think also there's always been a slight undercurrent of sexism, and I think certainly I have found that at times to be quite difficult. I think we haven't got time to go through all the examples, but I want to share a couple of them which have been really important in changing the way that I approach things. After I passed my MRCS, we were invited to a reception at the Royal College of Surgeons, and we had to walk up a very grand staircase to reach the reception at the top. And as you go up the staircase, the wall is lined by portraits of past presidents, at the time all of which were male. And as we climbed up the stairs, I was with my husband, I briefly imagined for a moment what it would look like to have my portrait hanging there amongst all of these old traditional male surgeons. As we got to the top of the staircase, we paused and the president put out his hand. And as I was about to shake his hand, he turned to my husband, shook my husband's hand, and his wife patted me on the back and said, "Congratulations, dear, you must be so proud of him." And, it was one of those awful moments where that vision of my portrait was completely shattered. And, I think it comes back to me every now and then. So I recently considered standing for the college council, and that vision at the top of the stairs really sort of came back to me. And it wasn't the reason in the end I decided not to go for it, but it really made me think that, many of us have these shared experiences where we are felt less valued or less welcome. And I think that's one of the things that deters women from putting themselves forward for leadership roles and other positions. And it's something that we really need to change. There was another example where I was invited to a large international conference to take part in a debate. And there were probably about 2,000 people in the audience, so I was quite nervous. And I was speaking against a colleague and a peer who had a very similar level of experience and training as I. And he was introduced as Professor so-and-so, and the speaker regaled the audience with tales of all of his great credentials and his academic expertise. And then when it was my turn to be introduced, he stood up and said, "And here's Claire, she's got a great dress and a good pair of shoes." And I was completely taken aback by this, and it really threw me. And when we had the first sort of pre-debate vote, the vote was overwhelmingly won by my colleague. And I felt that this introduction had really sort of changed the way that the audience viewed me. So I was fueled by quite a lot of indignation and certainly a large amount of rage. And I went on to give the debate of my life, and I won the debate and turned it around. But I decided at that moment that I wouldn't allow this sort of experience to carry on, and I would try and do something to address it. And that's what I've tried to do since.
Those stories, oh wow, I couldn't imagine. Shoes and a dress. That's
It's almost unbelievable. But, you know, when I've shared these stories, so many people have come up with similar experiences, and these really are almost everyday examples.
And when you're faced with such overt sexism, what intrinsic or internal things do you do to try and overcome it?
So I'm pretty thick-skinned. I think I sort of alluded to some of my upbringing, I think gave me some resilience. And there's probably nothing I haven't heard before. But I've decided to try and turn what is a negative experience into something more positive and use it as a lever for change. So as another example, I was invited to go to a large international conference as a keynote speaker. And it took place over Father's Day. So I'd left my husband at home with 2 young children, and was introduced to a fairly senior ENT member of the committee as the keynote speaker, Professor Claire Hopkins. And we'd been chatting for a while when he came up with questions, said, "So do you get to travel with your husband often while he's lecturing?" And I was a bit confused, and then realised what was going on. So I explained, no, I'm the keynote speaker, I'm Professor Claire Hopkins. And then he looked confused. And after a while said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you must be an allergist." And, you know, it was this disbelief that not only could I be the keynote speaker at a surgical conference, but there was no possibility that I was also a surgeon. So I decided to use my keynote address and my disclosure slide as an opportunity to raise awareness. So on my disclosure slide, I put that I'm a wife, a mother, a surgeon, and the keynote speaker. And I briefly alluded to this story at the beginning of my address. And what was really interesting was so many of the audience came up to me, young women, but also a number of males, to say that had very similar experiences. And clearly there was an undertone of sexism within the society that this had highlighted, and people went to sort of great lengths to address. So it's all baby steps, but you have to try and use these experiences for good and really try and drive conscious awareness of what is genuinely, I'm sure, unconscious bias, but it's so deeply ingrained it will take a long time to change. There's been another quite high profile example recently on Twitter after I appeared on BBC. As some of the work with COVID and anosmia, I've given quite a lot of interviews to the press, in the newspapers and on the television. And in almost every case, all the males who I'm interviewed with are addressed with full titles, whereas I'm addressed often as Claire Hopkins. And a recent example on the BBC, one of my colleagues was Professor so-and-so, Consultant ENT surgeon, and I was Claire Hopkins, ENT surgeon. I didn't even get the consultant in my name. So I put the 2 pictures up on Twitter. And I was fairly new to Twitter and was slightly taken aback by how quickly this spread. And I think I've now had about 45,000 hits or whatever. And I was amazed at not only how supportive the vast majority of people were, but how many people have very similar shared experiences. And I'm sure that although they're all relatively minor things, the cumulative burden is one of the reasons that women, you know, are more likely to suffer with imposter syndrome and less likely to put themselves forward. And as I said, I think we need to turn it into a positive and use it to try and drive change.
I saw that tweet and I definitely shared a few times. But it must be so frustrating to have that repeatedly happen to you. And I read the apology from the BBC as well, and it's kind of, well, you know, I apologize and there was a team. You didn't really take ownership.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry that it keeps happening.
And that's the problem. It's everyday sexism. It literally happens every day. People gave examples where the operating lists in their hospital are titled Mr. So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, but for the women's lists, it just gives their first name and surname, and they're not given any title at all. And they're just these constant little digs that after a while start to become slightly wearing.
Yeah. And looking back over your incredible career, has there been a kind of defining moment or a moment in which you felt challenged and it kind of changed how you behaved or changed the trajectory of your career?
I think it's really difficult to think of a single moment, but one of my first ENT mentors I mentioned, when I was a very junior doctor, took me to one side for a chat. I was slightly taken aback by that because I thought I was doing a really good job at getting everything sorted and really sort of driving things forward. And I thought I was being very proactive. But he used the words that, your drive to be efficient can come across as impatient. And he explained that I was alienating, particularly the secretarial staff, the nursing staff, and that I was seen as simply too aggressive given the situation. And it certainly made me think about, while we need to put patients first and drive patient care, we also need to be considerate of all the teams with which we work. And I am at times impatient, and I know that that is probably my greatest fault, and it's something that I have to really think to address, and I find myself not doing that as well as I would like sometimes. So I think we have to be aware of our faults. We all have them, and we have to try and continuously work to improve on that. And I think I was reminded very recently when I heard that one of my colleagues and one of my peers had been disappointed that I hadn't included him in a project that I was running. And so I picked up the phone and rang him to ask why he hadn't simply asked me. And he said, I don't think you realise how formidable you are. And that's not a positive thing. That's actually sort of being assertive to the point that it makes you unapproachable. And I think I have to be much more mindful of that and, not necessarily be soft around the edges, but make sure that people aren't scared to be able to approach me, particularly sort of in a team environment where you want people to be able to stand up and correct you if you're doing something wrong.
Okay, hi, Professor Hopkins. Great to talk to you on this forum, having worked together at Guy's when I was a junior ENT doctor. So a couple of questions from our point of view then. So if you could go back in time, what would you say to yourself to inspire or motivate yourself?
I think I was always pretty motivated. So I don't think that was the problem. But while I was in training, after I had my second child, I became a less than full-time trainee. And I have to say, I think I really struggled during that time because I'm quite competitive by nature. And I found it really hard to see my peers continue time in career, finish training and become consultants. And I really struggled with that feeling of being left behind. And at times I really questioned whether I'd done the right thing and whether I'd ever get to the end and get a job. So I think I'd like to go back to that person and reassure them that, it really would be okay. And in hindsight, it was one of the best decisions I have ever made and wouldn't have changed it for a moment. And you soon realize that once you become a consultant, however long it takes you to get there really makes absolutely no difference. And it's what you do with the opportunities that arise then that are important.
Sure. And have you got any advice for medical students and aspiring surgeons?
I have to say, I can't think of a better career, and I'm so pleased with the choices that I made. I get to be a surgeon, a researcher, a teacher, hopefully a role model. We all have great job security, particularly at the moment. I've got to travel the world with research. And at the end of the day, it's always going to be an interesting, challenging and rewarding job. And at the same time, I haven't had to sacrifice having a family and being a close part of that. So honestly, I can't think of a better job for anyone.
Yet, here you are.